Okay, so we're gonna continue working on our shoes today. I'm gonna answer some things in particular by showing you a little bit of them on here because I received some questions about how to differentiate things like laces, soles, texture, and so I wanted to kind of start by showing you where my drawing is because you can see that my laces go right through this big shadow, okay? So for me, it doesn't make sense to like draw in the lace and color the shadow around it. It makes sense to have them come up together. So you can see that there's a hint of a line right here that you follow, and some of these X shapes, those show where like my eyelets are and where my laces are. And I've got some loops here as well, but they're still very loose. They're still done completely in Vine charcoal because I'm not as worried about making sure that they're solid. I'm more concerned about keeping them flexible right now. So what I want to do is kind of take a moment and show some different kind of approaches to texture. I've got a shoe that I'm going to put next to me so that you can kind of get an idea of how we'll navigate this. What I would do is if I've got kind of some sketches of my shoe in place real quick, just so I can get a whole idea about it. So what I'm doing is I'm going to start designating kind of what's darker and what's lighter. So what's going to be darker is going to be what's the tongue of my shoe. Ooh, don't want to be too wobbly. Okay, because I'm letting that go back in space. And there's a little bit of shading kind of underneath the flaps that come around. This might be a great shoe for showing different types of texture too. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use a little bit of this because this shoe that I'm working on, I'm not sure if you can see it, I might draw it right next to it. It's black on black, so like my darkest dark is the value that's in the shoe, right? It's not the black laces, the black canvas, the black sole. It's the black in the shadows that I can see in here. So while I'm working with my Vine charcoal, I'm not capable of getting my darkest dark. I'm just capable of kind of shading where things sort of are and knowing at another time that to get the correct value that I see in here I'm gonna have to put in compressed charcoal, but I'm not there yet because I'm not mapped. So that's why I'm holding off and I'm still just using my Vine charcoal. So what I would do, I'm gonna make this look a little bit nicer so you can see like the laces that I'm trying to do, is I would kind of hint at where shading is. Looks like a weird arrow or a vase right now, but that's all right. I'm gonna go ahead and go in pretty dark in here with my Vine charcoal, all right? Because what I'm doing is I'm trying to build up charcoal on the surface. I'm trying to show that this fabric right here, right? I'm keeping that edge really crispy and clean. This fabric right here goes over the fabric underneath it. That's important to me. And then I'm gonna start kind of carefully measuring, because when I'm measuring, what I'm measuring is I'm checking how many eyelets I see. The eyelets are these kind of plastic circles that the laces go in. So I can see one kind of here, and I'm gonna hint at drawing ellipses. And by drawing an ellipse, right, an ellipse is a circular shape, so instead of sitting and drawing each perfect eyelet and making it nice and shiny, I'm just trying to get a hint for where that is, because I can't see the whole thing, okay? But I just need kind of markers of what I can see. It might be hard to see visually, so I'm trying to draw a little bit darker than I would if I was just me that I was looking at. So on this side, I can really only see the right side of the eyelets, and I really only see the highlights. So when I go back in, I'm gonna erase those out actually. And then across it, here I can see a lot more of them. So I'm gonna kind of give myself a little bit more information on them. But they're still not perfect circles. So you can see I'm trying to still make really dynamic marks for where I see these objects. Okay. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna break my charcoal up into teeny little pieces. Tiny, tiny. Okay? Because our gut instinct when we're drawing is gonna be to do something like and just to do this, right? But our shoelaces aren't just a line. It's easier to think of them as kind of dynamic shapes. They're more like ribbons. They kind of twist and they can move. And our charcoal is really great for making those kinds of marks if you use it appropriately. So I'm not gonna use a gigantic big stick to kind of draw in my laces. I'm gonna use tiny pieces of charcoal and I'm going to move it around, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of block it in, honestly. I'm gonna see if maybe I'm gonna work with my eraser. I'm gonna start it with my charcoal and we're gonna see from there. Okay, so that gives me a little bit of an idea using the side of it, and I'm gonna go back in and kind of reinforce where that eyelet is. Now this is only when you have all of the details done, because you're gonna have to work a lot back and forth, okay? I always have my eraser, I have my chamois, I have everything on hand. And what I'm gonna do is I can see a lot of texture in the laces, but I'm not gonna be super concerned with getting all of that texture in just yet, because that's kind of like frosting details, right? But you can see that I'm really mushing my kneaded eraser. And I'm gonna kind of erase out where parts of my lace are, okay? Because for me, this lace here is lighter than what's underneath it. Okay. I see a little bit of a lace behind here. So I'm gonna kind of make some marks for what I see in the background. And you can see that I'm not really reinforcing my outlines. I'm just making kind of tiny gestural marks. And then this kind of, and I might draw kind of backwards to forwards, because then there's a piece under here, and I can see that it kind of comes out and around, right? Again, I'm gonna go in with my eraser a little bit. this is only when you're finished with your details, right? Like I'm showing you how to kind of do frosting on it. Like look at how little built out my shoe is. I'm just trying to give you an idea of how they look sketched and how they'll look kind of drawn in as well. And this comes right over that and goes underneath. All right. Gonna reinforce that edge. Okay, so you can see that I'm just gonna kind of keep crisscrossing to show myself where my fabric is going, where my laces are going. And I'm really trying to let them wrap, okay? You see how I'm really moving them so that they wrap around instead of just making marks and being like, did it, there's some laces, okay? Because that's what we know, that's our brain on autocorrect. You want to be twisting and using your materials. And then what I'm going to start doing is kind of finding where it's highlighted, because I've got light coming from the left side right now. We can see that because there's no shadow here and there is shadow here. All right. So that means that the laces are lighter where they're hitting that light. There's a little bit of lightness underneath here. And it's hard because this is like black string on black fabric is the reality. You can see I'm using this kind of like a brush. I'm making brushy marks, okay? Because I'm gonna let it be very textural. Now, I've gotten about as far as I can go in this area without bringing in my compressed charcoal. This is how you wanna map in your shoelaces, okay? But the reality is that if I were to take my finger and drag it down, it's all gonna wipe away at this point. Look at how tiny my compressed charcoal is, right? Very little goes a very long way. I'm even gonna break it up so that I can get tiny, tiny details in there. Because what I'm doing is I'm trying to show myself where my darkest darks are, because these laces at this point can get a little bit lost. So what I would do is I would kind of create a little bit of a dynamic line in here. And I'm kind of following where the laces are. And then I'm using my vine charcoal in tiny circles to blend my compressed charcoal in. And to kind of be able to show the depth that I need. Bring it right up to that edge. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kind of try to find where my darkest darks are. So a little bit of one there, a little bit of a shadow. And now I'm kind of filling in this negative space triangle because I can see laces underneath it. And then again, when I have my compressed charcoal down and where I want it to be, I'm using my vine charcoal to work it in tiny, tiny circles and blend it out. okay? Again, I'm gonna go under here. I'm gonna show where this shadow is so that my laces pop against it, because my darkest dark is not the black, it's the black that, again, is in here, okay? And I know it's a little mind-numbing to listen to me keep talking about it and going over and over it, but I hope that it helps for you to visually see the different ways of kind of approaching and how I'm working spatially, right? I'm not drawing backwards to foreground or background to foreground. I'm not drawing one part and then the other. It all works up at the same time. It all works up together. And you can see that I'm blending this out. Okay. And that's how we're gonna create laces. That's it. That's laces. That's how they look, that's how they work. Yours are gonna move differently, okay? They might come in a loop off of the side, in which case, you know, when you wanna start doing your laces, what you can do is take your piece of charcoal, break it to the length of your lace, right? Break it to that space. And show how it's gonna move, okay? You see I'm like twisting my utensil to show the different ways that it's gonna move, okay? But remember, when I'm using vine charcoal, I need to be able to make sure that what's happening back here is worked up at the same point, and then I need to kind of go back and forth with it, because instead of using, you know, just a piece of charcoal for all of it, if I go back in and I shade this area, I'm gonna wanna go and use this to show, use my eraser and erase back out where my lace is. Okay, now even though that's really light value, I know that this is all one line, right? And then I would do things like find my shadow, using a little bit of compressed charcoal. I would make sure that that area is kind of completed. I'm just gonna let my marks exist, okay? Now, if you want to go really hyper realistic and start like pushing out your details, you're gonna start asking yourself, you know, what's the difference between the eyelets and the laces as far as texture? You know, do I see one and then the other? What's here? How do I make my eyelet look like it's metal and my shoelaces look like they're laces? You know, you can go back in, get teeny tiny eraser marks and do small textural marks on your laces. You can go in and you can kind of, in areas where you see the texture, like in highlights, make some hatch marks. Hatch marks are when we, all right, you know, my shoes are canvas. So by making some of those directional marks, I can show different things. We get really fascinated, right, when we see things that have hyper details on them. So another good example of that is you see, like, I can see my stitching along these laces, and it really shows up in areas of highlight. So what I could do is I could finish an area and I could go in and make small lines. To show where my stitching is, right? I can do them reductively. I could do them additively. I could do a little bit of both. Okay? Those small details are what make your drawing feel hyper realistic, but they come later, right? Because right now, the shoe is barely drawn. I would still need to do a lot of where the rubber soles are. You see I'm leaving a lot of the white of the page when I'm approaching this because I see really white highlights on here. These shoes are scuffed, so you can see I'm gonna just kind of scribble in all my different marks to try to make them look really beat up. And shoes have very awkward foreshortening in perspective, right? I'm sure you're gonna see that where like I feel like I can see more of the side of this shoe than I can because it's fabric and it's gonna roll back in space. Because there's this awkward undershadow. So to make it look like it's lifting off into space, I really have to be considerate of where my shadows are and where my highlights are. And anytime I bring in that compressed charcoal, which you can see in the video is so much darker than the rest, I'm going to use my vine charcoal to smooth it and blend it out, all right? Because they work as a team, they work in tandem. And then I'm gonna do things like I'm losing the right side of my shoe, so I'm gonna use my eraser, okay? I'm gonna bring that back out. You see, I'm kind of like just making it a little messy because these are messy. And in areas where I see a lot of details, I can go back in and I can finesse and I can really make it feel perfect. But that all happens once this is built up, right? Because when we zoom out, you can see that I'm very much not at this point with what's underneath, okay? That's if I work on something really tiny and very sectional, all right? So everything needs to get worked up to this point to be able to start bringing in these sweet details, okay? But that gives you an idea of how it's gonna look when you start bringing in those sweet details, okay? The last thing I wanna do, the last thing in my drawing is stuff like these stitches marks kind of going in. I can do some hatching in, you know, the sole itself, in that rubber. So that's the last stuff that I want to do because all of my groundwork is already there. All of my texture is where it needs to be. All of my laces are where they need to be. I'm going to start doing things like blending out and shading in areas that are wrinkly, right? And I can make really textural mark making. I can be very brushy. I can be very blendy. We've got a lot of different options. And I think it's important to look at how you want to make your marks, okay? And that's what we're gonna play with. So that's an example of zooming in and doing some details. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a time-lapse video of this drawing and kind of where I get to on that. Please go ahead and look at the Blackboard page for photos. I hope that was helpful. And I look forward to seeing you all in class.